Hi, everybody. I hope today is finding everybody doing well. It's a little bit cold here in Wisconsin, so um, yeah. Spring was here and then it left. So I'm hoping it comes back soon. Uh, Today, I want to talk a little bit about mixed up priorities within the church that I grew up in. If you have followed my blog at all, you know that I grew up in fairly impoverished family. And I have to preface this by saying that there are two factors that it is very important for me that everyone understand. The first is I'm fully aware that, like, my father did not support our family, and that is on him, and that is his responsibility and his guilt to bear for what he didn't do for me, especially when I was a kid. My mother, on the other hand, worked very, very hard, had a very strong work ethic, sometimes worked two jobs, always took overtime when it was available, and always tried to do better for our family. Um, at least until the point where she got so sick that she couldn't work anymore. So I want to put that out there first because I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea about my mother and think that she didn't work hard to support the family, because that wouldn't be true. She worked very, very hard to support our family. Um, so I'm aware that, primarily it's your parents' responsibility to take care of you. But I think that growing up in the church, um, you're really taught to believe that that's your family, that you're a part of the family of God. And sorry, I'm so hoarse today. And when you are growing up in a United Pentecostal church in particular, you're usually there all the time. I was there all the time. I was there 5 days a week for school. I was there on Saturdays for Bible quizzing. I was there on Sundays. I helped out in various ministries. So, like, I was probably as a teen at the church more than I was at home, which, means that they had a pretty big influence on me. And the first thing I want to talk about is poverty. We were very poor and I was very thin. When I look back at pictures of myself from that time period, it's very hard for me to look at myself because I look so unhealthy and so tiny. Um, and there were instances where I know people noticed. Uh, One time I was getting uniforms made for school, and the person who was sewing the uniforms said, "My goodness, like, you need to eat something or you're going to blow away." And nobody thought to ever ask me, like, "Do you guys have enough food?" Um, it It may have been because my mother was on the heavier side that they just assumed that we had enough food, but my mother was really sick and on a lot of medication, and her medication kind of made her blow up, and so it really wasn't a fair reflection on the amount of food that we had in our home. Um, so, you know, I know that people had to have noticed. I look at those pictures and I can tell that I was sick. I was not I was not getting enough to eat. And it makes me sad that no one ever asked me if I needed help or asked me if I had enough or offered help in any way, especially given how active I was in the church. And I feel like this is a bigger problem. Like, our family always struggled. And I'm not saying that it's everyone on the outside of your family's responsibility to take care of your family. But when you're in a church like that where you're supposed to be family, and you're supposed to love one another and you're supposed to take care of each other, I have to call into question why we were allowed to struggle so much and why I was left to, you know, not have enough food to eat. Um, And I think there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, there's this attitude of like, God is going to take care of us. If you ask God for anything, He's going to give it to you, He's going to provide it for you. So if God isn't providing for that family, it's probably because they have some sin in their life. And that was something that was really taught in our church, that when things go wrong, you need to look at yourself, you need to reflect on yourself, and you need to say, what sin do I have in my life, and how can I fix my problems by repenting of my sin or stopping whatever behavior that I'm engaged in that God is not pleased with? And, it wasn't hard with my family to point things out. I mean, people didn't like my father. Maybe it was because we were brown. I don't know. I kind of feel like that was a sin sometimes. Maybe it was because my mom didn't always come to church. Maybe it was because she cut her hair. Maybe it was because she wore pants for work because that was the required uniform. Like, the church could point to any of those things and say, because of these things, God isn't blessing them, and that isn't our fault. And so we're discharged of any responsibility to reach out and help this family. Which, I mean, maybe you could be okay thinking that if you were an adult and the family was just a couple or just some adults. But once there's children involved and you're claiming to be their church family, I feel like you have a certain amount of responsibility to provide and check in on those children and make sure that they're okay. Um, Jesus talks a lot about how we are supposed to interact with children. And I just didn't see that kind of loving care directed in my direction, just around having shoes that didn't have holes, having enough food to eat. As I got older and I had a job and I could do a little babysitting, then I was able to, provide for myself a little bit more, but like, I shouldn't have had to um, do that. And so that that's the first point. The second point is, it is very hard when you don't have enough to eat to see the church giving extravagant gifts to the pastor. New cars, vacations, all sorts of things that the church would give to the pastor as, a birthday present or an anniversary present or whatever. Um, Sitting in the pew as an impoverished child, that was really, really hard to see. And I don't believe during the whole time that I was growing up that our church ever had anything like a benevolence fund to help hurting people. So, if you're a poor family and you're, coasting into church on fumes, it's really, really hard to sit back and watch the pastor be loved on with all of these extravagant gifts. As far as I know, as I can remember, and, if someone else remembers differently, please, please let me know. I don't remember us ever as a congregation giving any money to the poor, whether it be in our own congregation or just homeless and hungry people in the world. We gave money to missionaries. We gave money to evangelists that were traveling through, but I don't actually remember us ever doing anything to help those who were seriously in need. And they were very quick to criticize my mother for taking this city job that required her to wear pants. And my mother was even told by some people that if the job required her to wear pants, she shouldn't take it because it would be a sin. But like, we were poor and struggling, and my mother had been working this really hard laundry job for a really, really long time, like over 10 years. And when she got the job with the city, in some ways, it helped to elevate us a little bit. I mean, not a ton, but at least enough so that we had regular health insurance and could go to the doctor. Um, it was an important step for our family when she took that job, and they really looked down on her, many of them, for wearing pants to work. So, like, that's the first thing. The next thing that I want to talk about is sickness. So, my mother had pretty bad asthma and eventually got to the point where it kept her from being able to go to work. Along with that, she had pretty severe bipolar disorder. And so she really struggled with her mental health. And that only added to the problems that our family already had. Um, the church, when I was there, really took the view that if you had a chronic illness, if you had mental health problems, it was because, like poverty, you probably had some unconfessed sin in your life, or you just weren't believing and having enough faith in God that He would heal you of whatever affliction you had. This really, really, really hurt my mother's mental health. My mother spent a lot of time in prayer, crying, speaking in tongues, and not spending time with me as a small child because she really believed that there was something wrong with her. And because there was something wrong with her, God wasn't relieving her of this illness and wasn't relieving our impoverished situation. Um, she did go to our pastor for counseling. He gave her fairly tone deaf counseling. I don't believe that he had any real understanding of mental illness or even of what it was like to struggle. So that wasn't really helpful for her. And she always felt incredibly judged, not just by the people in the church, but by God. And I think that it did a lot to hurt her relationship with God and therefore hurt my relationship with God because I took on a lot of her ideas. But where did those ideas come from? Those ideas came directly from the church. Um, my mother, when she would come to church and would try to get some comfort from people in the congregation, the women, what she would be told over and over again is God loves you, and you just have to have faith and believe that He's going to heal you and that He's going to help you. Instead of these women coming alongside of her and being her friend and checking in on her and coming by our house to visit and, making sure that she was okay, uh, especially because she had a history of suicide, attempts. Uh, Instead of doing that, they would give her these Pollyanna responses that were like, well, you just have to believe, you just have to have faith. God loves you and everything's going to be okay. Pat, pat, pat. All right, I got to go over here and talk to this person now. And she would be left there in her despair. And it made her feel rejected by people in the congregation, but it also made her feel like all of these people around me have their life together and God is blessing them. There must be something wrong with me that I can't get my life together. Well, when you have mental illness, you have mental illness. It's not a matter of you getting your life together. It is what it is. It's an illness. And so that's another area where I feel like the church's priorities were really, really, really messed up. There just seems to be such a lack of love and compassion and putting actions behind your love. During my adult life, one thing that I have always tried to do is put actions behind my love. If someone has a need, I don't say to them, I will be praying for you. I say to them, what can I do? Please tell me if there's something I can do. Do you need me to bring you groceries? Can I come vacuum your floor? Do you need me to watch your child? Like, I always try to put actions behind my sentiment, because to me, it's not real if you don't give your love feet and actually do something. So, all of the I will pray for yous in the world didn't do anything for our family. It did not lift us out of poverty, and it did not help my mother with her asthma and physical illness, and her mental illness. My mother suffered alone. Um, Eventually, she stopped going to church altogether because she was too sick. She didn't go anywhere. She was on disability. She was pretty much in the house with my stepdad all the time and my little brother. And no one ever came to visit her. And it was so sad to me because when my mother passed, I was 19 years old, and all these people from the church came. They came to the funeral, and it was like, another opportunity to be seen doing the right thing. But where were they when she was sick? Where were they when she needed a friend? She could have used help. She could have used someone to come over and help her with my brother, help her with the house. Just sit with her and talk to her, or talk to her on the phone. And so when I was sitting at my mother's funeral and I was watching all of these people, I was angry that, she was so alone at the end. I had seen her the day before and I had spent most of the day with her. But other than me, she didn't really have any friends. And I'm sure she was judged harshly because she was no longer going to church. But I have to wonder, and I suspect I know the answer, if any of these people ever called on my mother to find out why she wasn't there. Did they know? Was she in their prayer requests every Sunday morning? Was she on their mind? Did they know what her problems were? Probably not, because they were too busy judging and not busy enough loving. So the last part that I want to get to with mixed up priorities is life events. So there are a lot of things that can happen to you over the course of your life. You might go through a divorce. You might marry the wrong person. You might, have any number of problems in your life, because we're all human and we stumble and we have problems. Sometimes it can be things that are out of our control, like the death of a loved one, or, losing a job, or whatever. And what I saw time and time again is that when people suffered life events that were negative, it was almost always seen as a personal failing on their part. Oh, are you having marriage problems? You shouldn't have married that person. You must not have been listening to God about who you should marry. Are you sick? Well, you're not believing in God. Did you lose your job? Well, that wasn't the right job for you, and God has a better job lined up for you. I can't say when it's going to come. I can only hope that it's going to come, but he must have a better job for you. Um, you know, did you lose your house? Well, God is love and he's going to take care of us, and you just have to believe in that. But what I never saw was, let's take an offering for this family because the father lost his job. Or, like with our situation, I can only remember one time when someone actually helped us. I do also have memories of another family who was equally as poor as we were, who would do little things like bring me Christmas presents. And I always really, really appreciated that. That was very meaningful to me. Oftentimes, the Christmas presents were secondhand Christmas presents, but it showed love and it showed an effort of trying. And I think that that they understood the pain that our family was in because they were in the same pain. And so it was a meaningful to them, um, to see what we were going through, and they wanted to help us in any way that they could. But my mother was judged very harshly for having gone through a divorce. And she suffered a lot of pain because of what my father did to her. My mother and my father, they had a bad marriage. They loved each other, but my father was not faithful. And that was the main cause of all of my mother's pain with regards to her marriage. And so when her and my father got divorced, the church, they, for the most part, were okay with it because he committed adultery, but she was still looked down upon because of having had that divorce, even though it was not her fault in any way, shape, or form. Um, and it stained her. And that's something that I think I talked about in the last video, that you're only ever as good as the worst thing you've done. You wear the stain of whatever sin you've committed. The worst thing you've done is what you wear for the rest of your life, like a scarlet letter, especially if you're a woman. My mother remarried. The man that my mother remarried was a member of the church. He was sort of newly saved, and Pastor Grant did not want them to get married, but they went ahead and got married anyways. And I can see why that would be annoying to him because, my stepdad was not a great guy. But when my mom started having problems with him, and, you know, he was an ex-alcoholic, and so he had a lot of issues. Instead of being compassionate and loving, the attitude towards my mother was, "Well, you made your bed. You gotta lay in it." And, I look back at how Jesus dealt with people who were, what the world would look at and say, sinners who were choosing sin. And he sat with them and he ate with them and he loved them. And I don't ever remember Jesus sort of waggling his finger at someone and saying, "Well, you chose this, so now you're just going to have to suffer." Um, And I think that, that happened a lot where people would make decisions that, others in the church saw as not being good, not being right, even if they were things that were sort of in a gray area that were left up to interpretation. And then that could be sort of lorded over their head and given as an excuse for not loving them, for not helping them, for not offering assistance. And so these are just like three examples that I could think of this morning, kind of off the top of my head, of the church's mixed up priorities. We're going to keep giving money to people who have enough money, who are sort of in our club. We're going to keep praising them and offering them assistance and heaping love on them. But then the people who are sort of having a love drought in their life, who are going through a period of suffering, we're going to ignore those people. We're going to pretend like we can't see their suffering. We're going to pretend like we can't see the pain that they're in and the real hardship of their life, and instead focus on getting the pastor a new car. And I just think that that's really messed up. And a lot of people have said to me, "Well, you can't blame the church for the things in your family that were bad. Those were your parents' responsibility." And you're right, to a certain extent. But what they always forget is that I was a child of the church. The church raised me almost as much as my parents did. And what the church always puts forward is, we are a family. We are a family of God. And they will give lip service to loving one another, caring for one another, and that being some of the benefits of being a part of this family. But when push comes to shove, those things are nothing more than things that they say to one another to make them feel good about each other. And when it comes right down to it, you're either in the club or not in the club. And if you're not in the club, you're probably poor, you're probably a person of color, or you're someone who the church deems to be not good enough. And you're going to suffer because they're not going to take care of you, and they're going to criticize you if you go to a therapist, if you go to a psychologist, because you're really only supposed to go to God, which is so strange to me because they all go to the doctor. They all go to get their physicals, to get their diabetes taken care of or whatever. But for some reason, going to a therapist and talking to them about your clinical mental illness is seen as not trusting God, not believing in God. And, my mother was really of the mindset that she had mental illness because like demons were tormenting her, and that, she just wasn't doing a good enough job of trusting that God would swat them away. And she did go to a doctor for her mental illness. She went to a psychiatrist and a therapist, and they did help her. But the problem is, then you've got the guilt that you're carrying around because you were so broken that you reached out for whatever hand that was extended to you. And that hand that was extended to my mother was a psychiatrist and a therapist, and not her pastor and not the people in the church. So she lived with the guilt. And, you know, that that was not good for her because she had so many physical ailments, and the stress of the guilt of not being good enough and thinking that God wasn't answering her prayers because she was a bad person only added to the stress that her mind and her body were already going through. So I guess that's where I'm going to leave you today. I would be really interested if you grew up in a UPC church or something similar, like an Assemblies of God or whatever. Did your church believe the same way? Did your church behave in the same way? Or was your church more benevolent and understanding? As always, you can reach me at my blog, Surviving Church and Childhood. You can also reach me at my Gmail address, survivingchurchandchildhood at gmail.com. And you can always leave a comment. I check the comments regularly to see if anyone has added anything to the conversation. I'm always here to help. If you are struggling through your own trauma and your own experiences with the church, you can always feel free to reach out to me. I hope you guys have a really good week. Bye.